We're now joined by Eswatini Human Rights Lawyer Thulani Maseko. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Good evening. Welcome. Thank you, sir.
All right. Let's begin with these arrests. The government says that they are justified, and the opposition figures, everybody else pretty much is saying that the charges are trumped up and that this is typical behavior of trying to silence opposing voices.
Absolutely. We do agree with the voices that say that these charges are politically motivated and are trumped up. We do not believe that the honorable MPs have committed any offense, let alone an offense under the terrorism laws of Swaziland.
All right, so what have they been charged with exactly?
MP Bacede Mabuza faces 2 counts. 1 count under the COVID regulations and another count under the terrorism law of Swaziland. MP Mthandeni Mabuza faces 1 count under the terrorism law of this country. We don't believe that these charges are based on any reasonable thinking by the government. They are meant to silence them from continuing the call for the turning of the country into democracy.
When they say terrorism, what is it that they have done, supposedly, that the government is stating is terrorist activity?
That is where the problem is, as I understand. Because in order for one to face a charge under the Terrorism Act, you must have committed an act of terror. Even though the definition of an act of terror in the Act is quite wide, there is nothing to suggest that these 2 MPs did, in fact, commit any act of terror as understood in the context of the Act.
All right. So, given the history of what happens to opposition figures and dissenting voices, are you hopeful that some justice may come to these MPs, or is this following a script that's played out over time?
We do believe that despite the political environment that is hostile to those who are campaigning for democracy in Swaziland, we have some faith in the courts. You will remember that sometime in 2009, the late leader of the People's Democratic Movement, Mario Masugu, was the first person to appear before the courts under the Terrorism Act in this country. When he appeared there, the court found that he had not done anything to warrant his conviction, and therefore he was acquitted. Over the years, many of those who are campaigning for democracy have been set free in our courts. So despite
all right, it looks like that connection may be frozen. We'll give it another second or so. Thulani, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here, Peter.
All right, okay. Yeah, we lost you there a little bit. You were just starting to explain about recent court decisions.
I was saying, Peter, that let the world remember that Mario Masugu, the late president of Pudemo, was the first person to face a charge under the terrorism law, and fate on our side. He was acquitted because the court found that there was no basis for him to be arrested and prosecuted under the Act. We do believe, therefore, that despite the attempt by the state to interfere with the judicial process, these 2 MPs, obviously, given that there is no basis for them to be charged under this Act, will see some justice in the courts of our land.
What's your take on the judiciary? Are they fair? There are fears sometimes that, some decisions that should go with people don't go, partly because there could be some political interference. Is the judiciary free in Eswatini?
Of course, Peter, I think we need to locate the judiciary within the context of the Swazi politics. The fundamental problem in this country is that His Majesty the King commands supreme authority under, a dispensation where we are told the Constitution is the supreme law. There is therefore the concern that the judiciary, the way that the judges are appointed, compromises their independence. There is a perception that at the moment, many of the judges of our courts, can apply themselves fairly and independently on matters before them. But there have been, cases where 2 or 3 judges have applied themselves on the law and the facts before them, and the justice has prevailed. We don't see why, in this case, the 2 MPs must be, compromised and be denied bail when the matter comes for determination by Head Leadership Judge Dlamini. As she said, she will hand down judgment in due course. So that even though indeed we're living in an oppressive regime, there are judges who have stood in the side of what is right, as opposed to probing the dictatorship in Swaziland.
There is a 3rd MP, I believe, that's also being sought by the authorities. The longer this person is on the run or at large, does that complicate their situation?
So I lost you, Peter, towards the end. I didn't get quite the question.
I'm just saying that I believe that there's a 3rd MP or a 3rd person that's being sought by the authorities as well. How much do you know about that?
Well, I am aware that MP Mduduzi Simelane is said to be an MP who's wanted by the police. You will remember, Peter, that the warrants of arrest against the 3 MPs, as we understand, were issued on the 8th of July of this year. We don't quite understand why it took them so long to effect those warrants against the 3 MPs. As we understand, MP Simelane, until the time when it is said that is now run away from the law, has not been served with the warrant of arrest. Neither had he been served with the charge sheet. So we don't quite understand why it is being stated that it is running away from the law. But we know that on yesterday, when the matter came before Judge Dlamini, the state was arguing that he's a fugitive from justice. And it was argued that the 2 MPs who are in custody, if granted bail, will also abscond, the jurisdiction of our country. We're yet to see, whether or not MP Simelane will appear before the courts, or because of fear of persecution, as we understand they're being persecuted, we decide not to appear before the courts. I think the decision is for him to make, and we understand if he doesn't appear before the courts, because obviously justice must seem to be done. At this moment, people doubt if he comes back, we'll see justice in our courts.
That's where we'll have to leave it. Thank you very, very much indeed for joining us, Mr. Maseko.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Good evening.
All right. That's Thulani Maseko, who's a human rights lawyer in Eswatini, speaking to us about the plight of 2, possibly 3 MPs that have been speaking out for democracy, the right for the citizens to choose their MP rather than to leave it to the king to appoint at his wish. And that has found them in jail. But they are being charged with terrorism and flouting COVID-19 regulations.